Do I look like I work in finance now? This is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 4, the king of foldables. For years, this has been the only real option if you wanted a big screen tablet that could somehow fit in your pocket. Well, almost. But there's now a serious challenger from Oppo. This is the Find N2, and unlike other foldables from Honor, Xiaomi and Huawei, this is not a straight copy of the Samsung. There are some interesting ideas here that could potentially make this a better foldable. And look, it actually fits. But enough chatter. It's time to settle the question once and for all. Which one is actually better, the Samsung or the Oppo? Let's go. Let's start with the basics. Both the Z Fold 4 and the Find N2 come with a big screen that folds inwards, revealing a smaller cover screen. The industry is converging towards this more conventional form factor. The original Huawei Mate X and XS had a screen that folded backwards, and we all know how that turned out. They just followed Samsung. Where these two differ is in the screen sizes. You know the Z Fold by now. You got a tall and narrow screen at the front, and when you open it, you find a 7.6-inch display, which is still slightly taller than it is wide. The outer screen is a little bit wider than before, but it's still awkward to type on. The Oppo does things differently. It's a bit wider than the Z Fold 4, but much shorter. It's so cute! It's about the same size as an iPhone 12 or 13 mini. And unlike the Samsung, it's actually nice to type on here. It's also much better to use one-handed. The Z Fold 4 has a sort of reachability mode buried in the settings, but no. As you can imagine, using the cover screen is so much nicer on the Find N2 than the Z Fold 4. You can actually scroll through Instagram or TikTok without feeling cramped. The Samsung lets you see more posts at a time, but that's it. And don't get me started on browsing the web, where the Oppo absolutely crucifies the Samsung. But of course, the real highlight of any foldable is when you unfold it. The Z Fold 4 has been able to stay opened at different angles for a while now, and the Find N2 is only now adding that functionality. The Oppo's hinge isn't as tight as the Samsung's. It holds its angle anywhere between 45 and 145 degrees, and anything less or more than that and it just flops open or closed. The Z Fold 4 can hold seemingly any angle. But just because the Samsung's hinge is tighter doesn't mean it's better. It doesn't always open flat, so you kind of have to bend it more like this to fully open it. And it doesn't make the most reassuring sound either. Every once in a while the phone makes this cracking noise. Can you hear it? It sounds like I'm breaking the screen. It really doesn't inspire confidence. When it's open though, man, are these screens fantastic. They're OLED displays with 120Hz refresh rates and they're gorgeous. The Oppo goes one better with its hinge. See, the Find N2 uses what Oppo calls a flexion hinge that enables the screen to fold in a sort of teardrop shape. And if you look closely through here, you can kind of see it. Not only does this let the phone close flat, and you can see that the Oppo is thinner than the Samsung, but it also means there's less of a crease when you open it. This year, Oppo has widened the hinge so that this teardrop shape has been made wider, and so the crease is even less pronounced here. It's still there. It's not completely gone like everyone says it is, but it is less noticeable than on the Z Fold 4. And you definitely feel it less when you run your finger through it. With such a large display, reflections are more of a problem, and the Oppo has a far better anti-reflective screen than the Samsung. It's a bit bluish, but it's a lot less distracting than what you get on the Z Fold 4. I mean, just look at this. Where the Samsung pulls back ahead is in the screen size. It's a physically larger display, 7.6 inches versus 7.1. But the main difference is when you open it up, it's still a portrait screen, so there's more height, you get more stuff on screen at once. On the Oppo, you get a portrait screen at the front, but a landscape display on the inside, so there's less screen real estate. Everything gets cut off. You have to rotate the screen. Yes, it's almost square, but you do get a bit more at the top and bottom. So, the Oppo has a better cover screen, but the Samsung has a better inner display. But hey, if this gets too annoying to use, you can simply just use the phone like this, like a normal phone. This is the Oppo's party piece. The truth is, both these phones are compromised by the software. Third-party app support on Android tablets is notoriously bad, and it's the same story on these foldables. A lot of the apps are just blown-up phone apps. Samsung can boast all it wants about full-size Bloomberg apps, but if apps that people actually use for work, like WhatsApp or Slack, if all these apps waste all this screen real estate, then what's the use? It's the same story with social media apps like Facebook or Twitter, which just magnify your feed. On the flip side, I've now found the perfect phone for old people. You can finally look at your Facebook feed without squinting, especially if you also make the fonts super huge. What? The real benefit of the big screen, however, is the ability to split screen, and here Samsung again pulls into the lead. You can have up to 3 apps open at the same time, instead of just 2 on the Oppo, and you can also add a 4th app as a floating window. The Z Fold 4 will also force unsupported apps like Instagram to work with split screen. You get the old app may not work in split screen message, but it's fine. As for the Find N2, I like the fact that you can simply run 2 fingers down the screen to enable split screen, and I like the animation too. But then you open Instagram and what? Aiyo, Oppo! There are a few other things I like about the Z Fold 4, like the taskbar that shows all your split screen apps, and a split keyboard that puts the keys closer to your thumbs. It's actually nice to type and work here. That's why I keep the stock Samsung keyboard on the Z Fold 4, even though Gboard and SwiftKey are technically better keyboards. Now, I should point out that the Oppo Find N2 is running on Chinese market software because, it's only sold in China. Perhaps if there was a global release, it would be better optimized? Who knows? Now, what about videos? Well, they're great on these big screens, but they're not perfect. Yes, they are larger than your average phone, but you get huge black bars on the top and bottom. And while most of the time you won't notice the crease on either of these phones, the reflections can still be distracting sometimes. But what about the outer screen? The Oppo's is shorter and wider, which makes it taller and less wide in landscape. So that will make it better for videos, right? No, you don't want to watch videos on here. Trust me, you don't. There's nothing wrong with the screen itself. It's bright, it's vivid, and it's just the right size. But it doesn't have stereo speakers. The sound only comes from one side, which is stupid. That's because the phone opens up in landscape mode, which means both the speakers have to be at the bottom. The Z Fold 4 has speakers on the top and bottom, so they're in exactly the right place whether the phone is open or closed. The more you use the Find N2, the more you realize that Oppo has had to make a few sacrifices to get that perfect outer screen size. Now, you might be thinking that the big inside screens are good for gaming. They are larger than most other phones, they have 120Hz refresh rates, and nope. When you're playing games in full screen, the controls along the outer edges can be a bit hard to reach. So for fast-paced games at least, it's not really a viable option. Also, a lot of games aren't optimized for such a big display, so they can be very pixelated. Really, you should be playing them on the outer screen, and this is one area where the Samsung has a bit of an advantage. The wider display gives you a better view of what's going on, but it's still a bit narrow on the top and bottom, and the weight and width does make the phone a bit cumbersome to hold. The Oppo is quite a bit lighter, but the bottom line is you really shouldn't be buying either of these phones for gaming. As for the rest of the specs, they're about the same as a regular flagship phone. Both the Samsung and the Oppo come with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip, along with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, so they perform very similarly. They're both very smooth in daily use, although because the chip has to power 2 displays, they're not quite as fast as other flagship phones when you're pushing the performance envelope. The Oppo pulls ahead when it comes to battery life. Despite being a physically smaller phone, it has a slightly larger 4520 mAh battery compared to 4400 mAh on the Samsung. That's because the Z Fold 4 has to fit wireless charging, which the Find N2 lacks. The Samsung's battery also has to drive 2 larger displays. The net result is that the Find N2 can deliver 5 hours of screen on time, whereas the Z Fold 4 can barely hit 3. That means the Oppo can last about a day and a half. The Samsung is dead by the end of the day. For something that's supposed to be a productivity device, that's not good. Let's be honest, you won't buy any of these phones based on their cameras. But here's how they fared anyway. Both the Oppo and the Samsung come with a triple camera setup, with a 50-megapixel main camera, an ultra-wide, and a telephoto shooter. The Z Fold 4 does the typical Samsung thing of oversaturating and over-sharpening the photos, but it does offer a good amount of detail across all three cameras. The Oppo has more natural colors because of its Hasselblad color science, but it squanders the megapixel advantage it has with its ultra-wide and telephoto cameras. The photos look very soft in comparison. Low light performance is a bit more complicated. The Z Fold 4's extra saturation gives you more vivid photos, whereas the Find N2's photos are completely washed out. They really do look like phone photos from 5 years ago. But it has to be said, it's the Oppo that delivers more detail, and there's some weird artifacting going on with the Samsung. Video performance is very similar on both phones, although the Samsung has the ridiculous option of 8K recording. It also offers better stabilization and smoother exposure control, but it also tends to underexpose the video and again applies a bit too much sharpening. And then we come to the selfie cameras. The outside cameras deliver a similar amount of detail, as does the inner camera on the Find N2. But the Z Fold 4 only has a 4-megapixel inner selfie camera, and it's an under-display camera as well, so it's bad, like smeared with Vaseline bad. I should point out that the display over the camera is higher resolution than it was before, so it's much less distracting when you're just using the phone or watching videos. So, what have we learned here? I said at the beginning of the video that the Z Fold 4 is the king of foldables, and for a very good reason. Samsung has had years to polish the Fold formula, taking it from its ropey beginnings and turning it into the refined device it is today. This phone is a far cry from the fragile Galaxy Fold from 4 years ago. But there's a sense that Samsung is resting on its laurels. The Z Fold 4 looks almost identical to the Z Fold 3. It has almost exactly the same features, and it's even more expensive than before. And that's why the Find N2 is a breath of fresh air. It's smaller, lighter, and therefore easier to fit in your pocket. It also has a better outside screen, but Oppo has made some compromises because of it, and you can really tell. The Samsung also feels like the more premium device overall, with its polished aluminium body, a better multitasking UI, and a more consistent camera performance. But it better be when it starts at 6,799 ringgit. This 256GB version is 7,299 ringgit. What the hell, man? So the Samsung is still the king. But the Oppo runs it really close. I really like this thing, which is why it's such a shame that the phone will only ever be sold in China. Come on Oppo, just bring it in already. Thank you for watching this comparison test between the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 4 and the Oppo Find N2. I want to know, are you Team Samsung or Team Oppo? Let us know in the comments down below. If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell icon so you don't miss any of our future videos. As always, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.